Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mahri Irvine, and I'm the executive director of the Women's Liberation Front, or WoLF for short. WoLF is the United States' largest radical feminist, nonpartisan agency fighting for the total liberation of women and girls. Our mission is to protect, restore, and advance the rights of women and girls through legal argument, policy advocacy, and public education. And today I wanted to introduce the two of our feminist heroes here in the United States. We have Lauren Bone. She is a partner of a newly formed law firm called Jackson Bone LLP. And we also have Amie Ichikawa. She is the founder of Woman to Woman, which is a women's prison reentry organization. So I've invited Lauren and Amie here today to talk with us about the lawsuit that WoLF has filed against the state of California, and to provide us with some really crucial and important updates about the challenges that are facing incarcerated women in California. So to catch you up briefly, if you're not familiar already, back in November 2021, almost a year ago now, WoLF filed a lawsuit on behalf of 4 incarcerated women in a California prison. These plaintiffs are Janine Chandler, Crystal Gonzalez, Tamikia Johnson, and Nadia Romero. And we filed this lawsuit because California is currently violating women's federal and state constitutional rights. So I'm not going to do much talking during this interview. Instead, we're going to be listening and learning from Amie and Lauren. And Amie, this first question is for you. I wanted you to just please tell us a little bit about Woman to Woman and the services that your agency provides to women.
Thank you, Dr. Mahri. Woman to Women, which is now an official 501c3, was just an idea. It was something that many of us already do and did when we come home, which is help the women that are still inside with reentry services, giving them the things that they need when they don't have a lot of support on the outside. If you don't have a whole team or a really supportive family network out here, it's very hard to get any of your needs met and to set things up upon release. So we provide connections to dignified reentry services. So we're like a resource hub. We just also started the Woman to Woman Express, which is the ride home program. So women who don't have a ride home can have a safe ride to whatever their destination is once we find out where they're paroling to, if they're going to a transitional program or back home. We'll help get them there. We'll make sure that they have clothes. We're going to take them to lunch. We're going to make sure that they have the basic essentials to get through the next few days. And, a lifelong support network. We also provide advocacy, which is pretty much how we met WoLF. When there's policy or laws that are put in place that cause severe injustices and they're detrimental to women's well-being, mental health, physical safety, that's when we do our best to step in and get the help that we need to remedy those situations.
Thank you, Amie. I meant to mention as I was introducing you that I believe that having a women's prison reentry organization is actually incredibly unique in the United States, because years ago, I did my dissertation with an organization similar to yours. And at the time, I think it was one of maybe only 2 women's prison reentry groups in the whole country. And that one since has gone under and is now defunct. And so I was just wondering if you could let us know, are there a lot of other agencies like yours anywhere in the United States, like where they're specifically focusing on women who are coming out of jail and prison?
There's a lot of organizations that have that in their name. And there's a lot of organizations that receive funding for what would be a organization that helps women. However, due to the current climate, a lot of organizations have their hands tied as far as how much they can really offer women. They're becoming organizations that are open to everyone, which isn't a bad thing, but I feel we as women need more specific women-centered services and programs that are created around the specific needs of women. So we're sticking to that. We have a lot of respect for the other established organizations. However, this is just the route that we're going.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think everybody watching would agree that anybody coming out of prison or jail, male or female, needs help reentering society, right? But for women especially, you mentioned when women are released, sometimes they don't even have a ride home. And I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about how you see the intersection of sex and poverty playing out in these women's lives? Because from what I've heard, when women are released, they often literally have no money. They have the clothes on their back, and that's it. And so what do you see as being, how is that especially dangerous for women who are coming back into society?
Well, from like, as soon as you walk out, if you don't have your plan set up, the anxiety that haunts you, for months up until your release is really crippling. We're detail oriented. We want to have our plan set. We want to know exactly what's going on, and to have to live in a state of constant unknowing is stifling. It's like suffocating. You get $200 when you walk out of the gate, and if you don't have someone waiting for you, you have to buy a bus ticket out of that $200, and they just send you to anywhere outside of the county. You're abandoned again. We're not advocating for people to get handouts or for anybody to feel sorry for us, but we definitely want to be able to provide the kind of resources that are going to prevent people from going back again, from falling into the same habits. There's people waiting for these women at this bus stop with drugs and the worst of intentions, because it's that easy to fall back into a pattern of those behaviors when there aren't any options that are being presented in a way that you're made aware of. I didn't know that there were any services when I came home. I just was dependent on my family for communication, and they don't understand, and it's not their responsibility to be able to relate to me. I was so lonely, I had no one to talk to. That's why we created our own networks. We have like a private Facebook group with 1,300 members of formerly incarcerated women. We have to depend on ourselves in order to make it to the next level, because there aren't the things available that we need. So we're just trying to make them as we go along.
Yeah, thank you. And what I'm picking up from you is women coming out of prison and jail, and of course, women who are still incarcerated, are really uniquely vulnerable, not just because they are people who are incarcerated, but because specifically they are female human beings who are incarcerated. And you mentioned when they come out, they're going to be at risk. They're being targeted by traffickers, by pimps, by drug dealers. We know that homeless women are incredibly at high risk for sexual assault, trafficking. And so all of that is laying really heavy on women's minds when they're being released. So your agency is contributing so much, profoundly important services to these women. So thank you. So Lauren, my first question for you in this interview is, I very briefly described the lawsuit that WoLF has against the state of California. And of course, our viewers can go to our website. We have a lot of detailed information about that lawsuit. And so Lauren, I was wondering if you could tell our viewers, what is it that is so unique about engaging in a lawsuit when your plaintiffs are incarcerated? Because any lawsuit, I imagine, has its own set of challenges, but you are working with women who are literally behind bars. And so what kind of unique challenges does that create for you as an attorney?
A bunch of different kinds. So there's, as you mentioned, just the general challenges of prison litigation. So there's client access. Can't just call them on the phone. If they want to call us, or if they use the email system, then that is monitored and recorded. And so, that's not hypothetical. They do record and monitor it. We know that they do that. So it's really difficult to schedule legal calls. We can usually only do it once or twice a month. And so they have to wait for anything that needs to be private to give information that way. So it's really difficult, combined with the information asymmetry. When something's going on with one of our clients, our opponents in the case know before we do. They know right away. They can keep us from them. So we could be set up for a legal call, and I could get a guard on the phone who says, sorry, they couldn't make it. And, there's nothing we can do about that. The other thing is that there's a law called the Prison Litigation Reform Act, and it is meant to introduce some barriers to prisoners litigating, filing lawsuits against the government related to incarceration. And it requires them to exhaust administrative remedies. And what that means for California is they have a process, it's the 602 process, where you file a grievance, they rule on it. If they deny you, you have to work it up the chain until they finally declare it exhausted. And only then can you file a lawsuit. That is not an issue yet, at least in our case, because we are making a facial constitutional challenge, which means that we are arguing that there is no way to implement this law that would protect these women's rights and safety. And if there was a way we could, then potentially they would have to exhaust those remedies. And they did go through the 602 process, but we believe strongly that based on what the law does, there's simply no way to implement it without violating their constitutional rights. And actually, I should say, one of the things it does is the status quo in terms of gender identity policies prior to this law, SB 132, was that on a case-by-case basis, a man who had surgery, did not have a functioning penis, could apply for transfer or placement in a women's facility, and they would do an analysis based on security and management. And it was not a perfect system by any means, but the numbers were low, and there was not the problems that a functioning penis brings. So what the new law does is it makes it illegal to discriminate based on anatomy, based on genitalia. So you cannot use the penis as a reason why you can't place them in a women's facility. So that places them at an unacceptable risk of pregnancy, of STIs, including HIV, which has very high rates in the men's prison across the country. So that's a huge problem. And then as you both know, the history of male violence that women who are incarcerated are almost universally subjected to creates very high rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety. And when you lock women with those kinds of history, lock them in with men who are violent, with the kind of men who have hurt them in the past, it's just not a place, physical safety aside, it's not a place where you can rehabilitate easily. So, and it is so preventable because the stated reasons for wanting these policies are that it's to protect the safety of these men who, it is argued, face a high risk of violence in the men's prison. But in general, a third space is a better solution, practical solution, than turning women's prisons into mixed sex prisons. But even aside from that, there's actually 1,000 men in California prisons who identify as transgender and non-binary, and over 300 who have applied for transfer to a women's facility. Now, that is more than enough to have a separate facility that could meet their needs entirely. You could have medical and mental health provisions that are unique to that population. And so this is really inventing a new problem that doesn't need to be solved. So I mention that because, within our political climate, it's really one-sided, where people have characterized this lawsuit and WoLF and even Amie's organization as transphobic, anti-trans, simply for raising concerns about these really practical matters of that no one's disputed. So we've had the opposing side, the state, and then the proposed interveners, which is representing several trans-identified males who are incarcerated, have not disputed our claims that these women are put at increased risk of pregnancy and STDs. And so they're simply basically saying it's not fair to exclude and using the discrimination argument. Within this political climate, it's just really hard to get a fair hearing from the media and from politicians on this issue. It's viewed very much as like a left-right issue when that's not really our experience with when we talk to women about this. And the final issue that's really a challenge, which I think we're going to talk more about, is basically the significant efforts that are put into silencing women who are participating in this case, whether they're plaintiffs or witnesses who have offered witness declarations and things like that. So seeing silencing, retaliation in various forms from other prisoners and from the prison itself.
So yeah, there's a lot of unique challenges that you and your law firm partner, Candace Jackson, because I want to give her a shout out as well, that both you and Candace are dealing with. You've got all the unique logistical issues, like you were saying, your plaintiffs can't just give you a call or send you a text when they need something from you, right? So there's
not a private one.
Right, all those layers there. And then Amie, I realize you might touch on this more, but just, Lauren, you were talking about female inmates who are being housed in close private quarters with male inmates. When they have functioning penises, right, these female inmates prisoners are put at higher risk for health conditions, right, STIs and pregnancy. But even if a male prisoner is transferred into a women's facility, even if he has had some type of surgery where he no longer has functioning male genitalia, just the presence of being housed in a really small room or in a shower with a man, that really is going to put a lot of these women at risk for psychological triggers, PTSD, anxiety, depression, the whole 9 yards, right, when it comes to mental health issues. And I think when we think about the unique challenges of this litigation, then that all comes into play too, because you're dealing with a whole group of women who are really being threatened psychologically as well as physically, and that must weigh really heavily on your plaintiffs' minds. So
I mean, it's going into now complex PTSD because they're being forced to live in similar situations that their original traumas occurred in. This nightmare, the disassociation, the forgetfulness. It happens to me because I'm choosing to stay with them in this trauma. The symptoms are so much more intense, and I feel like I'm going crazy half the time. And it's not that, it's literally PTSD. It's literally complex PTSD now. And just to piggyback before we move forward on Lauren's statement that a third space is the right alternative, there's 2 prisons in California that are closing. There's one that's being used currently as a training facility that used to be medical. It used to be a medical facility. I mean, they're already equipped and it's already ready to rock and roll. And this, would help keep more CCPOA members employed. And there really isn't a logical reason to not at least look into this or consider it as an option to respect all parties involved and to make sure everybody is given respect, agency, and dignity within the Department of Corrections.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there are many, many people out there, myself included, both of you, who think that, a third space option really seems like the logical solution to this problem that has been caused, right? So, Lauren, I had a follow-up question for you about this lawsuit. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, WoLF filed this lawsuit in November 2021. At the time of this interview, it is mid-September 2022. And I know I've been asking you for months now since I came on board at WoLF. Is this normal for a lawsuit to take so long? What's going on with the slow movement that we're seeing in this case?
First of all, there's nothing normal about this lawsuit. Everything that's gone on is unprecedented. It's an unprecedented area of law, and it's just a lot of things that are happening are crazy. No, it's not normal for lawsuits to take this long. And it's especially not normal for, they filed a motion to dismiss in April, and then the proposed interveners filed a motion to intervene in May, early May, or even late April, whenever it was. And that we should have had briefed on that, which we did, and had a hearing, and the judge ruled, but they're so backed up, they wouldn't even hold a hearing just due to the backlog in the court. And they said at the time it could be months before they rule, and it's been almost 6 months now. And there's been some other interim activity that we had. There was some ancillary issues that we had to address in the court. So it's not that we've heard nothing, but it's a pretty major thing to have a motion to dismiss where they're trying to get rid of the case entirely, and to not have that ruled on, where if they were to dismiss the case, we could proceed with appealing it to the Ninth Circuit, or if they don't dismiss it, we can proceed to discovery and start getting real evidence on the record and start pursuing real solutions there. So that is a huge issue. And there's not necessarily an easy way to move it forward until the judge finds the time to do so.
And I know that we have seen this sort of in the news for the past 2 years in general, right? Generally speaking, the impact of the COVID pandemic on, that might be contributing to some of the delays as well. But I'm just thinking that for our 4 plaintiffs, as well as all the other women in these prisons who feel similarly to our plaintiffs, and Amie's in touch with hundreds and hundreds, thousands, right, of incarcerated women across California. I just can't even imagine psychologically waking up every day and just wondering when we're going to see some movement on this lawsuit, because these are women who are literally imprisoned, right? They're holding on to this lawsuit as hope that, that they're able to fight for their rights and for their dignity. And every single day that goes by, it's as frustrating as it is for us. I can't even imagine how upsetting it is for them, for the slow
And they're
pace.
vulnerable. Mm-hmm. They're vulnerable. One of our plaintiffs is being harassed and stalked by 2 men in a way that's difficult, if not impossible, to prove, because of, it's more subtle than it's actually pretty easy to stay up in people's face when you're locked up together. And there's, it's very, very easy to intimidate. As Amie mentioned, as we've talked about, there's PTSD and other things that make it very easy for men who do want to harass them based on their participation in the lawsuit to know how to trigger them, to stand too close, to touch them, or, even just a jerky movement and make it look like it might be an accident. But it's, it's because, it's incredible bravery and courage to be able to.
I mean, these are psychological tactics that we're not equipped to deal with. People had no idea what kind of skilled, manipulative experts at this kind of psychological game were coming in. There was no way to adequately prepare the population for the influx of what was to come when women's prison became men's PC overflow. Imagine living your life as soon as you wake up every single day, and the person that has dedicated their life to taking you down is just in your peripheral all day. There is no respite from the constant attack against your entire being.
I think for those of us who have not been incarcerated, but are just even capable of empathy and imagination and thinking about that, I'm sure that many people watching this interview are survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence or stalking. And, you know, Lauren, you mentioned stalking, and stalking is an incredibly difficult crime to prove anyway. And, you know, what you're describing going on inside of a prison, it's everything such close quarters, it's even harder, right? To prove that level of intimidation and harassment. And you know, the vast majority of incarcerated women were already survivors of sexual violence and or domestic violence by the time they came into the space. And so, Amie, you know, now you're describing that literally every day when they're waking up, some of these women are now, they're literally sharing a cell with men. They're being forced to share showers and toilet facilities with men. And that level of re-triggering of the trauma is just, I think, unimaginable for a lot of us, but it is reality for these women in California's prisons, as well as other prisons in other states now. So Amie, on that note, we've obviously been talking about the issue of men in women's prisons, but more broadly, could you educate our viewers, what are some of the challenges facing California's incarcerated right now?
Aside from being erased, there's a lot of medical health issues that are really underrepresented. For example, in CCWF, where I served my term, I've always known that there was a high level of arsenic, but it's 2,020 times higher parts per billion than medically recommended for human consumption. There's notices when you enter each of the yards for staff to not even wash their hands with the water that the women eat, drink, bathe in, and survive on. And this is going on 30 years for some women. What does, you know, slow arsenic poisoning do to the body after 20, 25 years? Also, hexavalent chromium is, I think, 30 times higher than what it's supposed to be in that water. And that's just for their wells. That's just for CCWF water. That's not the same for Chowchilla water. These kind of things, I wanted to get it tested, for example, and the only laboratories that will test that are state approved are quoting me between $5,000 and $6,000, depending on how many toxins I want to get tested in this sample. And this is for Chowchilla water. CIW water is even worse. It's, I mean, they have boil orders, at least, you know, quarterly, and they're advised to use cheesecloth and bleach. You know, you don't really have the convenience of boiling and having cheesecloth when you're in a box. So they just, what can they do? There's women who call me that have one kidney and kidney disease, and they're like, I'm so thirsty, Amie, what do I do? And even if I were to drive up with pallets of water, there's a process. They can't just take it. But the women have to sit there and watch the pallets of water in the sun that are just sitting there because nobody wants to distribute them. The mental health services and the lack thereof within the system is creating a huge problem as well. Services are not conveniently readily available. You know, you would think that there would have been some preparatory measures taken to prepare people mentally for the transition, but there wasn't. They just had to wake up one day and go to medical and see the flyers on the wall for what happens when you become pregnant, what your options are. Instead of adequately providing them with some form of education, it's like they induced this terror amongst the population. So mental health, water, that's a huge issue. Lack of availability for rehabilitative programs within the system is huge. I think there seems to be a monopoly of who controls what goes into the prisons as far as education and self-help is concerned. We're doing our best to develop some curriculum on how to arm people with tools that they need to defend themselves from the psychological attacks that they're under constantly. We want to teach people about Darvo. We want to teach the women about gaslighting. Once you can identify what these things are and give it a name, you're so empowered. Once you guys taught me what misogyny is, and I realized, oh, that's my whole life. It was very liberating to know that it wasn't just for me. It wasn't just because someone hated me. It's because this is a thing. This is a thing. And there's survivors and there's other women that I can talk to about this. And they have the tools that I can use, and they'll share that toolkit with me. And then I can then share it with the women inside. So lack of education, water, and mental health services are huge issue.
Yeah. So, Amie, I mean, I'm just thinking physical health issues, right there. What you're describing with the water is terrifying. I'm sure the food's not nutritious. I'm sure these women don't have access to great gym facilities to keep themselves healthy. And then, you mentioned that there's not many rehabilitative programs, even though technically, right, prison is supposed to be a place where people get rehabilitated so they can return to society and be productive and all that. But you mentioned like educational programs and self-help, but I'm curious, and I suspect I know the answer to this based on my past research, but what about, in addition to like, self-help tools and education, what about clinical mental health services for women? Because we know most of these women are already coming in with high levels of trauma. A lot of them would probably benefit from, really high quality professional counseling services. What happens if a woman needs counseling services when she's in a California prison?
You have to put in a request, inmate request to medical for mental health services, and you can wait anywhere from 3 weeks to months. There's there's a limited accredited staff, which is why, again, we have to take care of ourselves and equip our people with the tools they need to try and help each other from within, because we can't be dependent on the state to do the right thing or to hire enough clinicians to help people with what they need help with, because they're like, when I was there, everybody was being prescribed Lexapro. It was like the flavor of the month. So there were thousands of us who were prescribed Lexapro for a plethora of mental health issues. I don't know if I needed it or not, but I got to see a counselor maybe 3 times in this 5-year period. But I was free to get new prescriptions, at ease. I think that's a big alternative for them. It's much easier to medicate and placate than to invest in the people there, because they have no societal value. So why would we invest in them? Right now, I think Suboxone is highly overprescribed. There's people who don't even have drug problems that are being prescribed Suboxone, and it just dulls them. It dulls them. It makes them not care about anything, and it's creating a zombie-like atmosphere, because more and more people are being given this drug for no logical reason.
Thank you. And I think, a lot of people in this country are very concerned about mass incarceration, about the treatment of all prisoners in facilities, whether they're jails or prisons, that they're a short time or a long-term amount of time. But, going back to looking specifically at these issues facing women in prison related to our lawsuit, I was wondering if we could get into a little bit more detailed information right now about some of the individuals who are not necessarily plaintiffs in WoLF's lawsuit, but have become caught up in this, this situation. And so one person I know that we really wanted to educate the public about right now, Sagal Sadiq. And Sagal is currently a prisoner in a California women's prison. And can you tell us a little bit about Sagal and what's going on right now?
Sagal was a resident of the honor dorm. a model inmate, someone who's gone without a write-up for many years, which is technically a requirement in order to live in the honor dorm. Segal hasn't eaten in 30 days now. Segal has had no urine output for 3 days now. And this is because Segal was given a retaliatory write-up for speaking out in the 602 process against the implementation of SB 132. So because of this retaliatory write-up, which Segal was found guilty of, that's where the hunger strike came from. And this is unheard of in the women's facilities. This is not something that happens on a regular basis. This is not men's prison. Segal's diabetic. From what I understand from reports say that Segal was in the skilled nursing facility for a couple of days, and the doctor said, just, I'm going to release you back to administrative segregation. And the message I got was, please help me. And the helplessness that I have is overwhelming sometimes, because this person is willing to take this to the grave, because that's how important this is, to make sure that the rest of the population inside isn't discouraged from standing up for themselves. So Segal just signed a will this week, and there's very little we can do. The requirements that Segal gave the prison was, put me back in the honor dorm. Put me back in the honor dorm, because there's exceptions are made regularly. I can be one of those exceptions. The write-up I received was retaliatory, and it was intentional so that I couldn't go back to the honor dorm. So put me back in the honor dorm. So earlier this week, that specific honor dorm had 16 rooms full of people displaced and moved off of the yard. And they moved a unit from receiving people who haven't even processed or seen their counselor, or, they're still in oranges, state issue oranges, which separates people who have processed and come out of receiving. That it's ridiculous. They put them in those empty rooms, and then they combined the remaining honor dorm residents who fit the criteria into two hallways, COVID and not COVID, smashed them all or combined them all into the existing availability, all because that was what Segal's requirements were. I want to go back to the honor dorm. So instead of putting Segal back in the honor dorm, they basically made it a not honor dorm.
Wow. Yeah.
If I could just
yeah, go ahead, Laura.
back up, I would give a little more context to that too. For people who maybe haven't followed the case as closely, as to who Segal is and what Segal has done for this case and for the women in that facility. Earlier this year, Segal witnessed 2 incidents of sexual harassment being perpetrated by a trans-identified male who had been transferred under SB 132 against one woman, and reported it. Not only reported it, but insisted on documenting it and standing up against it, saying it wasn't right. Segal didn't come out against SB 132 on principle early on. It was after, it was in this narrow circumstance of saying, this is not right for this person to be acting like this. If it was any other situation, you wouldn't stand for it. And coming forward, and at that time, and one of our plaintiffs, Tamikia, was also a witness to part of this incident. And so the three of them, Segal, Tamikia, and then the victim of the sexual harassment, who, were ended up placed in protective custody briefly for two of them, but Segal went on a hunger strike earlier this year as a result of that, to be put back on the honor dorm. So Tamikia and the other woman were put on a different yard, but Segal was placed back after that hunger strike. And so this is hunger strike part 2. And it's more.
Remember, they were put in administrative segregation because
Mhm.
someone dropped an anonymous note saying that they were in danger. So this is just a cycle of abuse and psychological warfare that we are just not equipped to defend ourselves against, because it's
Exactly. And Sadiq Segal spoke up and shared this experience with us, did a declaration for us in our opposition to the motion to dismiss. And after, just weeks after we filed that brief with that declaration attached, that's when the three of them got these rules violation reports, saying that they made false allegations. And that is unprecedented. We have spoken with experts, we've spoken with staff members and former leadership at CDCR who have said they've never heard of such a thing. We've spoken with a very trans-friendly attorney who works in prison issues, who said she's never heard of such a thing. She feels it's clearly retaliatory based on the timing, that there's no other real explanation for it. And so I just really want to note that Segal is a biological female, but identifies as a transgender man, and feels a responsibility to the women in that facility to, in a kinship, and take care of them. And I just wanted to.
We have to really point out that Segal doesn't have any support from the other side, because
oh yeah,
Segal's
a traitor,
a woman, essentially. So what this means is there is no backup, there's no assistance, because these gender self-ID policies are not created for their entire community. It's for very, very specifically, very specific. It's very, very specific who this is aimed at and who this is geared towards. And it does not include people like Segal.
No, in fact,
I think,
go ahead, Mahri.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so in some ways, this sounds like a complicated situation, and in other ways, it's actually, listening to it, very straightforward, in that we have Segal, who is a female prisoner, but who identifies as a man, right, as a transgender man. Segal witnessed a male sexually harassing a female, and Segal was brave enough to come forward and file a report about witnessing the sexual harassment. And now Segal, it appears, is being retaliated against. And, Amie, as you just said, we have, these proposed interveners in our case who claim that they represent the transgender community, as a whole and all that. But here we have an inmate who is a trans identified female who's being punished, essentially, right, for speaking out in defense of a woman. And so it's complicated on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think it's really simple and straightforward, that this is a situation of a female prisoner who is being treated very, very, very badly in the system.
And so, actually, Segal's the first person to recognize that. I just wanted people to hear some of Segal's own words. And this was in the declaration submitted on, it was May 31st for this case, where Segal said, "It is my belief that all of this is happening because the patriarchy protects itself. If a man wants to be a woman, then he is entitled to be whatever he wants to be because he is a man and the patriarchy will protect him. But a trans man is a biological woman, and therefore the patriarchy wants to keep them exactly where they belong, in a marginalized category. The patriarchy is protecting itself, and it's working out super well for them, and it's horrifying. This absolutely cannot continue." So this was prior to all of this. After coming forward and having this, making this statement and standing up, to have this come and happen it's just disgusting.
And I reached out. I reached out because I'm not beyond asking for help to save somebody's life. And the same people, very same people that I was in communication with in regards to the first hunger strike, just a couple weeks later, were openly stating in publications that I'm a bigot and my organization just wants to continue to contribute to the sexual abuse of trans women. The very same people that I was in communication with. So this is all really intense.
Yeah, it is. It is intense. It is horrifying. And I think for a lot of people who are watching this, who, if they themselves have not been incarcerated, or they themselves don't, have a loved one who is incarcerated, this just seems surreal, right? Like they really don't even understand all of these things that happen behind bars in these facilities. And Lauren, I know that we've already kind of gotten into this conversation, but I was wondering if you could take just a few minutes and provide just an overview about when incarcerated women feel like they're being mistreated, they think they're being retaliated against, or if somebody has abused them or assaulted them, how can they make reports? How can they try to get help and support when they have been mistreated, or they believe that they've been mistreated?
Yeah, so the processes that exist, I mentioned the 602 process, and that's available for any type of grievance, and that includes complaints made or reports made under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, so it's PREA reports. Technically, you shouldn't have to do a 602 for that. Disclosing it to any staff member or to an outside party is supposed to be sufficient. In practice, it's better to do your own documentation as well. We filed a third-party group PREA complaint that listed out all of the reports that we had received from dozens of women, and actually laid out the retaliation. This newest thing had just happened right as we were filing this, and so we were able to lay some of that out in there. So I think that's really important to do, and documentation and speaking up about it. People like Segal can file 602s based on SB 132. SB 132 requires that prisoners who identify as transgender and non-binary be given consideration to their own perception of their health and safety. And it's really, it is not my perception that that was done here at all. That it's very clear to me that Segal's needs were subordinated to the desires of this transfer who wanted to be able to act however they want to act. And so I think that's a big thing. The other one that I was going to mention that is good is mental health. So I know it's hard to access, but when you can, if you can go and make mental health reports, it's just another way of documenting where you can state your experiences and your feelings and the impact on you and have it written down somewhere. So it's, anything that you can do with that. So those are the processes available.
So
unfortunately, we can see what happens when you bail yourself of them sometimes. So
yeah, well, and that's what I was going to ask you. So sort of on paper, right, the textbook answer is there are these different processes in place, both through the prison, like the 602 process, and then also the PREA complaint process, and PREA is national, right? Like that they're able to lodge that complaint. But based on your observations over the past year or so working with women in prison, how effective are these processes when women need to get help?
Well, we have seen an escalation. We have seen continued efforts at silencing, at retaliation, for anyone speaking out at all. And so And there's emotional blackmail too. There's, oh, don't you really want them to go and they're going to get raped and murdered in the men's prison, and you care more, care more about your own, really just this guilt and shame for daring to stand up for themselves and their needs. So I would say it's not been overwhelmingly positive, but I don't know the alternative. That's how we get it on the record, so we can pursue it in court. That's how otherwise we have no case, because there's nothing written down.
And Amie, I wanted to ask you the same question based on your observations and also your own experiences, because you are a formerly incarcerated woman. How effective, in your opinion, are these processes for women to get help?
For women to get help, they're not. However, it's all that we have right now. And historically, because of the ineffectiveness, it's very effective for the state in suppressing any potential lawsuits and any potential negative attention, because women become hopeless. Once you put your 602 in and they do things like staying, like what they did to Crystal, you just, cancel out whatever her experience was. So now you're not only her body's in prison, now her mind is in prison, because you're saying what she experienced didn't happen. A man didn't come and put his penis on her, a woman with a penis did. That's how it was corrected. So it is very depressing, and it is, we shed a lot of tears over this, but it's not. I know my responsibility right now is to continue to encourage them to not give up, because that's why we're in this position. This is how it was designed, to keep us defeated and to keep us silenced. And everything that's happening to them is in turn going to happen to us if it isn't combated by us collectively. And this is so nonpartisan. This is just a women's human rights issue. We have to really band together in being the voice of the voiceless for this situation. They need to be encouraged. They need to be reminded that they are worth the hassle. It's not a freaking hassle. It's your right. It's your right, and you're worth more than nothing. And it took me 5 years of sitting in that hellhole to know that, and it took them telling me every single day, you're worth more than nothing, right? It took a whole prison full of women teaching me and reprogramming me and helping me understand that I am not bothering anybody by standing up for myself, that it is not an inconvenience, that I'm not an inconvenience, and that my mental health, my well-being, my own perception of safety is not a hassle. It's not a problem. It's okay. It's your right. And you have more than every right in situations like this to stand up and say, this isn't cool. This is not, I'm not going to sit back and just put my head down and be quiet. I'm not going to. And I just want to firmly state that we're going to continue to support them. We're not going to be quiet, and we're not going to put our heads down, because it hasn't gotten us anywhere in the last couple 100 years. So it's time to get loud, and it's time to fight for our rights, like we care about ourselves and like we're worth something.
Thank you. And I know that many incarcerated women aren't, going to be able to see this, but I think that you're speaking for them, right? And speaking to them with that message that we all know that they are just as worthy as anybody else in this country and in this world. And they are a very particularly vulnerable group of people. And I think it says a lot about our country, right? The way that we treat the most vulnerable group of people. And right now we see that they are being treated very, very, very poorly. And as you just so eloquently stated, that they are worth it to themselves to keep fighting and to keep pushing forward, using every administrative remedy available to them, working with lawyers like Lauren and Candace, working with groups like yours, because they are human beings and they deserve to be treated with dignity at all times. Mm-hmm. as we're starting to wrap up, Lauren, my final question for you right now is, what are some ways that the public can help incarcerated women right now?
Oh, yeah. So let your elected representatives know where you stand. WoLF has done polling in the past, I know, that's shown on the prison issue, particularly, especially when it comes to sex offenders and domestic abusers, and that there's very, very broad agreement that they should not be placed in women's prisons. And so I think that you wouldn't know that from looking at the media or from looking at how elected officials talk about it and vote. And they really need to hear from people, especially on a state level. Your representatives are listening. They want to be reelected. They want your vote. And a lot of them have just never heard that, you know, there's anyone but horrible bigots who oppose any of this stuff. I think so I think that promoting the Women's Bill of Rights, which would go a long way towards making sure that protections that are already in law based on sex would remain based on sex, and just really opposing state level policies like SB 132. Earlier this year, we successfully killed a measure in the state of Maryland, which is a very blue state, had a lot of support for it, had an SB 132 style bill up, and WoLF board members and advisory council members testified in front of the House and the Senate, went in person to do the Senate, and the bill died in committee. So it was supposed to go into effect next month, and now it won't, unless they reintroduce it again and have to pass it, and we'll show up and do it again. So I think that's really important, that especially on a state level, these things make a difference. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you know, you mentioned Maryland is a blue state, right? And so maybe people would have expected it to, that type of a bill to go forward, because we have seen bills obviously in California and in New York and various other states. But as all three of us have mentioned throughout this interview, this is not a partisan issue, right? There are a lot of members of the general public who, honestly, because of the biased media reporting, they add, you know, when this issue is first introduced to them, they hear that it's, you know, vulnerable trans women, they're in danger in a men's prison and they need to be moved to women's prison for their safety, right? And that's the only story that is put forth. So a lot of the general public, when they see these sort of inaccurate and misleading news stories, that's what they're thinking. But when we start to dig deeper and we learn about the profiles of the specific male inmates who are being transferred over, I think the general public, when they learn these details about the types of people being transferred in, it really does start to change their mind. And it doesn't matter if somebody is typically a Republican or typically a Democrat or typically independent. You know, when they really start critically thinking about this issue, this is an issue related to women's basic, human rights, women's dignity and privacy and safety, right? When it comes to being able to shower just with other females, when it comes to being able to use the toilet just with other females nearby, being able to sleep at night, knowing that a male is not just sleeping a few feet from you, do something to you in the middle of the night. So this is very much a nonpartisan issue when we get down to the heart of the matter here. So Lauren, you were recommending that the public can talk to their political leaders and their lawmakers, and
their friends and family.
And their friends and family, absolutely. But let these leaders know at the local level, the state level, and the federal level what they think. And so, Amie, my question for you then is pretty much the same. What are some ways that the public can help incarcerated women right now?
Sorry, you lost me real quick. We're having rolling blackouts, rolling blackouts in California. So my stuff died. But I think it's very important that people who want to financially contribute to causes make sure that they do their research, do a little homework, do a couple of Google searches, make sure you know where your organization of choice's funding comes from before your donation. Make sure you're familiar with what the cause really is before you're romanced into making a contribution. It's important. You deserve to know. You have every right to know. Shouldn't be a secret, and it should be really clear and obvious at the bottom of people's websites. Like on ours, we don't have any money, so it's not really a long trail to follow. But we want to maintain full transparency, and we would like to encourage other organizations to do the same. It's important that people understand the small means that we have go directly to our communications with women inside. And that's one of the most important ways that you can help, is by making sure they're able to talk, they're able to have somebody to vent to, they're able to call us and say, Amie, oh my God, I need help, or I can't handle this, or this is happening, or call Lauren. They have to have access to those lifelines, and it's not free. It's not free. It's not free for them. It's not free for us. And my savings is drained, so we're really, cooking with gas now and ready to start generating some legitimate funding to do things like pick our sisters up from the gate and not worry about gas money, pay our phone bills, and not have to make sacrifices in our personal budgets elsewhere. And these are not, these are not huge things. These are just vital things. So again, just make sure you know where your money's going when you put it somewhere. It's important. And please just keep this in prayer, because some days it feels like it's going to take a miracle. But that's where we're at with this. And we appreciate even the thoughts, people who think about the women inside that would have never normally done that. People who are starting to change the thought process and see them with societal value, and see that they are people that have redemptive qualities, that they're not trash, that they shouldn't just stay in there forever, because a lot of them are going to come home, and we want to make sure that they're coming back to a place that doesn't hate them, because they've been hated on enough, in this lifetime. So I think changing thoughts, keeping us in prayer, and doing your homework are very, very, very important things for people to do on this side of the wall.
Thank you, Amie. And as we wrap up, you mentioned that sometimes it feels like it might take a miracle. And I just want to say to you that, Amie, you're that miracle. And woman to woman, and all of the women you are working with and fighting with every day, you all are making that miracle happen, because you are bringing to light so many of the injustices that are facing specifically women in prison, because again, women have so many unique needs and challenges, and you are that voice for them, right? When they have voices, but those voices are being silenced constantly. And so you and your colleagues at Women to Women are fighting for them, and you're giving them hope. And we have so much gratitude towards you. And then Lauren, I want to say, to you and Candace as well, right? You are contributing to that miracle too, right? Because there aren't a lot of attorneys in this country right now who want to touch this political, hot button issue. And you and Candace were absolutely fearless in taking this on, because you know how important women's rights are in this country, and you were willing to put your professional reputations on the line, right? And say, we are going to take on this lawsuit for these women in California, because their voices deserve to be heard. And it's women like you who are making this country so much better for every woman and girl. So I thank you both so very much.
Thank you, Mahri.
All right. So for more updates to WoLF's lawsuit, you can visit womensliberationfront.org. And Amie, your agency is called Woman to Woman. And what's the exact name of your website for people to check you out?
Our website is womeniiwoman.org. II is in Roman numerals. So womeniiwoman.org.
All right. And once again, the name of Lauren's law firm is Jackson Bone LLP. And from all of us at WoLF and Jackson Bone and Women to Women, we all thank you for taking time to watch this interview. And please get in touch with any of our agencies if you want to know how to get involved in the fight to protect women in prison. Thank you.